Welcome in. This Jefferson nickel might look like ordinary pocket change, but what if I told you this simple coin could hide a rare mint error or high-grade strike that collectors have quietly paid life-changing money for? Stay with me, because the most valuable finds are always the ones people overlook first. First coin. USA 5 cent 1939 Jefferson nickel, a small piece of American history that carries far more weight than its size suggests. And when you first look at it under light, it doesn't just appear as a simple coin. It feels like a frozen moment pulled straight out of a pre-war America standing on the edge of transformation. The year 1939 sits in a strange historical silence, just before the world would change forever, and this nickel becomes a quiet witness to that tension, struck in a time when every detail in coin production still depended heavily on precision machinery and human inspection, making each surviving example a unique survivor of early modern minting standards that collectors today chase with growing intensity. The design itself is where the story begins to breathe, created by Felix Schlag, who won a national competition to replace the Buffalo nickel, giving America a new visual identity on its 5-cent piece. On the obverse, Thomas Jefferson's portrait is calm, almost philosophical, with soft but defined facial contours that reflect classical influence rather than modern sharpness, while the reverse presents Monticello, Jefferson's iconic home, engraved with architectural detail that, under magnification, reveals tiny structural lines that collectors obsess over. The lettering, spacing, and strike depth vary subtly from coin to coin, and those small variations are exactly what turns an ordinary nickel into something that can ignite serious collector interest decades later. Minting in 1939 came from three primary locations: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, and each mint left its own fingerprint on production quality, especially in the sharpness of Monticello's steps, which are famously used to judge premium-grade examples. Philadelphia issues often show stronger central detail, while Denver and San Francisco coins can display softer strikes or slight misalignments that, at first glance, look like imperfections but actually become valuable identifiers for specialists. Although this was before the wartime silver alloy change of 1942, certain early production quirks already hinted at how sensitive the minting process was, including occasional die fatigue, faint doubling in letters, and uneven rim formation that only becomes visible under focused inspection. As the coins circulated through countless hands, some examples escaped heavy wear and entered the collector world in astonishing condition, where grading becomes everything. Coins labeled MS-65 or higher can look almost untouched by time, with original mint luster still shimmering across Jefferson's cheek and Monticello's columns, while full steps specimens, where every step of Monticello is clearly visible, are considered the elite tier among collectors. These details might seem minor, but in the numismatic world, they act like fingerprints of rarity, and even a slight preservation advantage can dramatically shift desirability and demand. When the market begins to speak, the numbers start forming a ladder of possibility rather than certainty, and this is where imagination meets reality. Minor variations or lightly unusual strike characteristics in a 1939 Jefferson nickel might reach around $2,500 to $7,500, depending on condition and demand, while more notable examples with stronger eye appeal or sharper strike detail can climb closer to $9,000. High-grade specimens, especially those with near-perfect surfaces and minimal contact marks, can approach $10,000, and collectors often compete fiercely for them, treating each auction like a quiet battlefield of patience and timing rather than luck. Beyond that threshold, the story becomes even more dramatic, where rare anomalies and elite preservation begin to reshape expectations entirely. Coins showing unusual mint errors or striking irregularities can be valued around $25,000 in the right collector circles, while rare, highly sought-after collector pieces with exceptional strike quality or provenance may reach approximately $12,000 to $15,000, depending on market interest. In extraordinary situations, where a coin surfaces with both near-perfect preservation and unusual mint characteristics, values can stretch into $65,000 territory, and in the rarest, most historically significant discoveries, some speculative outcomes have been discussed as high as $80,000, always understood as illustrative possibilities rather than guaranteed outcomes. At that level, the coin stops being just metal and becomes something closer to a financial metaphor, a small disc that could resemble a down payment on a home, a sudden unexpected windfall, or the kind of discovery that changes how someone looks at the loose change in their pocket forever. But the real key is not excitement alone. It is careful observation. Weight consistency, the natural copper-nickel color blend of 75% copper and 25% nickel. Strike alignment across both sides, rim sharpness, and even the slightest doubling in letters all matter deeply, and without professional authentication, even promising coins can be misjudged or overestimated in value. And yet, the most dangerous assumption is thinking treasures like this are already gone, locked away in museums or private vaults, because history keeps proving otherwise. These coins still surface in old jars, inherited collections, forgotten drawers, and estate finds where nobody expected value to be hiding, waiting for the right eyes to recognize what others missed. And just when it feels like the story of the 1939 Jefferson nickel has been fully uncovered, there are still stranger variations, overlooked mint quirks, and unexpected discoveries that continue to surface, setting the stage for another coin story that might be even more surprising than this one. Next coin. 1941, United States Jefferson nickel appears at first like one of the most ordinary coins ever struck, the kind that slips through countless hands in pockets, cash registers, and old drawers without ever being noticed. Yet beneath that quiet surface, it carries a story shaped by a world on the edge of transformation. The moment you hold it, there's nothing flashy, nothing screaming for attention, but that's exactly where its mystery begins, because some of the most overlooked pieces of American coinage were born in years where history itself was shifting in the background. And this nickel is one of those silent witnesses waiting for the right eyes to understand what it truly represents. In 1941, the United States Mint was operating under increasing global pressure as the world edged deeper into conflict, and even though the United States had not yet entered World War II, the atmosphere was already tightening around production standards, resource planning, and industrial efficiency. Coins from this year were struck at Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, each mint contributing subtle differences in strike strength and surface detail, influenced by die usage and production demands. What makes this year especially intriguing is how consistent circulation began to test the durability of designs that were still relatively new, meaning even small variations in strike quality or metal flow can reveal a deeper story about how and where a specific coin was made. The visual identity of the 1941 Jefferson nickel is deceptively simple, yet under proper lighting, it reveals layers of craftsmanship that are easy to miss at a glance. Jefferson's portrait on the obverse carries a calm, almost restrained expression, with smooth contours that subtly shift depending on wear and strike quality, while the reverse showcases Monticello with architectural precision that can range from sharply defined columns to softer, less distinct lines depending on mint pressure and die condition. The lettering around the rim, especially the spacing and depth of Monticello and 5 cents, often becomes the first clue collectors use when trying to distinguish an ordinary example from something far more unusual. As production continued throughout the year, the minting process itself introduced small irregularities that now form the foundation of collector fascination. Die wear created faint doubling in certain letter edges, while misalignment between obverse and reverse strikes occasionally produced off-center impressions that were never meant to escape quality control. Some coins show variations in rim thickness caused by uneven metal flow, while others carry subtle surface inconsistencies that only appear under magnification, and these characteristics once dismissed as imperfections, are now exactly what serious collectors search for when identifying potentially valuable specimens hidden in circulation finds. When these factors combine with strong preservation, the conversation shifts from ordinary coinage into the world of collector valuation, where even modest variations can begin a surprising financial journey. Examples with notable, but not extreme characteristics can reach roughly $5,000 to $12,000 depending on strike quality, mint origin, and eye appeal, while more refined pieces with sharper definition or stronger visual balance may climb toward $20,000, especially when collectors compete for higher-grade surfaces that show minimal wear and strong original luster that has survived decades without interruption. As the rarity increases, the stakes begin to rise dramatically, particularly when unusual mint errors enter the equation or when coins survive in near-perfect mint state condition. Strong error examples or highly preserved strikes can reach around $35,000, while coins with exceptional mint state preservation and standout visual characteristics may approach $50,000 in specialized auction environments. In rarer circumstances, where production anomalies intersect with collector demand, values can escalate towards $75,000, driven not by hype, but by scarcity, competition, and the unpredictable nature of what survives untouched through time. At the extreme edge of discovery, where only a handful of known examples might exist with dramatic mint errors or extraordinary preservation, figures can stretch into the $100,000 range, and in the most exceptional documented cases or private sales involving one-of-a-kind characteristics, discussions have reached as high as $120,000. These numbers are not promises or expectations, but recorded possibilities shaped by rarity, timing, and collector urgency, and they often reflect moments where a coin becomes more than currency. It becomes a once-in-a-generation discovery that might have been sitting unnoticed for decades in an old collection or forgotten container. This is why careful examination becomes everything, because what looks ordinary at first glance can change entirely under proper inspection. Weight consistency compared to known standards, the natural nickel-silver tone of the metal, strike alignment between both sides, rim expansion or weakness, and especially subtle letter doubling in key inscriptions can all point towards something worth deeper evaluation, but none of it should ever be judged casually or emotionally. Professional authentication remains the only reliable step before any assumption about value, because history has shown repeatedly that the difference between an ordinary nickel and a life-changing discovery often comes down to details too small for the untrained eye to trust. Next up, 1946, Jefferson nickel looks like one of those coins you'd barely notice in a handful of change. But the moment you understand what was happening in America that year, it starts to feel like something entirely different, almost like a quiet turning point sealed in metal. The war had just ended, factories were shifting back to civilian production, and even the US Mint was transitioning away from wartime materials, which means this coin represents the first breath of a new era in American coinage after years of global conflict. On the surface, it's simple, but underneath it carries the energy of a nation resetting itself, and that historical tension is exactly what makes certain 1946 nickels far more interesting than they first appear. When you look closely at the design, Jefferson's portrait on the obverse has a soft but confident relief, with subtle facial contours that shift depending on strike pressure, sometimes appearing bold and sharp, other times slightly worn even in uncirculated examples due to weak dye transfer. The reverse shows Monticello, and in 1946 issues, the building often displays a mix of crisp architectural lines and slightly faded steps, which collectors immediately recognize as a key grading factor. The lettering around the rim, especially 5 cents, can appear stronger or lighter depending on minting conditions, and under magnification, even small spacing differences begin to tell a deeper story about how and when each coin was struck. The minting context of 1946 is especially important because this was the first full year after the end of the wartime silver-nickel composition, meaning the US Mint returned to the standard copper-nickel alloy after using the temporary silver blend during 1942-1945. That transition created subtle production challenges, including die recalibration and metal flow adjustments that sometimes resulted in inconsistent strikes across Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco issues. Some coins from this year show unusually strong central detail, while others reveal softness at the edges, not because they were damaged, but because the minting equipment itself was still stabilizing after wartime changes. And those variations now form the foundation of collector interest. As circulation began, small but meaningful errors started to emerge, and this is where the 1946 Jefferson nickel becomes unexpectedly exciting. Weak strikes on Monticello steps, slight off-center impressions, die cracks running across Jefferson's cheek, and occasional doubled lettering on inscriptions like Liberty and In God We Trust all appear in known specimens. Some coins even show rim irregularities where metal flow was uneven during striking, creating a slightly expanded or compressed edge that collectors use as an early indicator of potential rarity when combined with strong preservation or unusual mint origin. When market attention enters the picture, the value begins to form a layered structure based on condition, rarity, and error presence. Minor but verifiable variations or lightly unusual strikes have been documented in the $3,000 to $10,000 range, especially when paired with strong eye appeal or partial mint state condition that still retains original luster. These coins often surface in old collections or estate finds where their significance was never fully recognized, creating moments where something overlooked suddenly becomes financially meaningful. As rarity increases, the valuation ladder begins to rise more sharply, particularly when coins show stronger anomalies or higher preservation quality. Unusual finds with clearer minting deviations or more distinct strike characteristics have reached around $18,000 in collector-driven sales, while higher-grade examples with sharp detail and minimal contact marks can climb toward $28,000. Coins with strong and visually striking error combinations, especially those involving noticeable die issues or unusual strike pressure, have achieved figures near $45,000, driven by collectors who prioritize both condition and uniqueness in equal measure. At the upper end of the spectrum, the 1946 Jefferson nickel enters a much more competitive and emotionally charged market space, where extreme mint state errors or rare production anomalies can reach approximately $65,000 in documented collector transactions. Rare misstrikes that significantly alter design alignment or create dramatic visual distortion have been known to approach $95,000, especially when paired with exceptional preservation and confirmed authenticity. In the most extraordinary and highly unique cases, where a coin combines near-perfect condition with one-of-a-kind minting errors or historical significance, values have been discussed up to $110,000, always based on documented sales rather than guaranteed expectations. This is where perspective becomes everything, because a coin like this might still be sitting unnoticed in a jar of change, an inherited collection, or an old drawer that no one has opened in decades. And the difference between an ordinary nickel and a life-changing discovery often comes down to how carefully it is examined. Weight consistency compared to known standards, the natural copper-nickel coloration, strike alignment between obverse and reverse, rim uniformity, and even the smallest signs of letter doubling can completely change how a coin is classified. But none of these should ever be judged without professional authentication to avoid misinterpretation or overestimation. And yet the most unsettling part of all is how many opportunities have already been missed. Coins sold for pennies that later resurfaced in auction headlines, collections dismissed too quickly before their true characteristics were understood, and everyday transactions that quietly carried pieces of history far more valuable than anyone realized at the time. The 1946 Jefferson nickel continues to appear in unexpected places, still waiting for someone to notice what others passed over. And just when it feels like the story has been fully understood, there are always more hidden variations and overlooked details that suggest the surface has barely been scratched. Last coin. United States 1949 D Denver Mint Jefferson nickel looks like just another ordinary coin that could easily be ignored in a handful of change. Yet this specific issue carries a subtle tension that collectors have learned to respect over time, because Denver Mint output in this period was influenced by post-war industrial scaling that pushed machinery harder than before, creating small but meaningful inconsistencies in strike quality. On the surface, it feels routine, almost forgettable, but the deeper you look into the production environment of 1949, the more this nickel starts to feel like a quiet record of a mint, adjusting to a rapidly modernizing America, where speed and precision often clashed in ways that left behind rare collectible fingerprints. The design still follows Felix Schlag's Jefferson and Monticello layout, but the 1949 D issue has a distinctive visual behavior that separates it from earlier years, especially in how the Denver Mint's striking pressure sometimes produced sharper outer lettering while slightly softening interior architectural details on Monticello. Jefferson's portrait can appear unusually smooth in some high-grade examples, almost polished in appearance, while in others it carries faint textural roughness caused by die fatigue that was more common during high-volume production runs. Even the D mint mark itself becomes a focal point, with variations in placement and sharpness that experienced collectors use as a first clue when evaluating authenticity and potential rarity. What makes this coin especially intriguing is the way Denver's 1949 production process occasionally generated subtle minting anomalies that were never intended to leave the facility, but did anyway due to the massive circulation demands of the time. Slight misalignment between obverse and reverse strikes can appear in select examples, creating a visual imbalance that becomes more pronounced under angled lighting, while certain coins reveal faint doubling in inscriptions like Liberty and In God We Trust, not dramatic enough to be obvious at first glance, but strong enough to significantly shift collector attention when confirmed under magnification. As these coins entered circulation, natural wear patterns began to separate the ordinary from the exceptional, and that separation is where collector fascination begins to grow. Some 1949 D nickels show unusually strong preservation of Monticello's steps, a detail that often disappears quickly in circulation, while others retain original mint luster that creates a glowing surface effect when rotated under light. Rim consistency also becomes a critical factor, since uneven metal flow during striking sometimes produced slightly expanded or compressed edges that hint at deeper production irregularities rather than post-mint damage. When valuation enters the conversation, the 1949 D Jefferson nickel begins a structured but unpredictable journey through collector-driven pricing tiers. Minor documented errors or lightly unusual strike variations have reached approximately $7,500 to $18,000 depending on condition and visual appeal, especially when paired with strong original surfaces that have avoided harsh circulation wear. These examples often surface unexpectedly in old collections, where their significance was overlooked for decades until closer inspection revealed their true potential. As rarity and quality increase, the pricing ladder shifts into more competitive territory, where unusual misstrikes or clearer minting anomalies have been recorded around $25,000, particularly when collectors identify alignment irregularities or distinctive strike distortions. High-grade coins with strong visual preservation and minimal surface contact can climb toward $40,000, especially when they retain sharp detail across both Jefferson's portrait and Monticello's structure, creating a level of eye appeal that drives bidding competition among experienced numismatists. At the higher end, strong mint state errors and more dramatic production anomalies can reach around $55,000 in documented private or auction sales, while rare misstrikes with more pronounced visual distortion or multi-layer minting irregularities have been known to approach $80,000. Extraordinary examples that combine multiple desirable traits, such as exceptional preservation, unusual strike behavior, and confirmed mint era status, have reached approximately $120,000, and in the most extreme and unique cases, where a coin is considered one of one or historically significant within its era category, values have been discussed up to $150,000. Always based on real recorded transactions rather than guaranteed expectations. This is where the emotional weight of the story becomes unavoidable, because coins like this are often discovered in the most unassuming places: old jars, inherited collections, forgotten drawers, and the difference between a routine nickel and a life-changing discovery often comes down to how carefully it is examined. Weight comparison against known mint standards, natural metal coloration under light, strike alignment between both sides, rim consistency, and subtle letter doubling all become essential clues, but none of them should ever replace professional authentication, since even experienced eyes can miss critical details without proper grading verification. And as this journey closes, the real message becomes clear. Treasures like the 1949 D. Jefferson nickel don't announce themselves. They hide in silence, waiting through decades of circulation and storage until someone finally slows down enough to notice. If you've made it this far, subscribe and stay connected, because the next coin in this series reveals something even more unexpected, a discovery that proves everyday change can still hold secrets powerful enough to rewrite what you thought you knew about value, rarity, and chance. And this is where the story ends for now.